In a small, quiet town, life seemed peaceful, but beneath the surface, two women, Olivia and Eudora, were engaged in an ongoing, unspoken rivalry. The source of this tension was their shared relationship with Lucia, their mother-in-law, who had always been a kind and loving presence in their lives. To Lucia, both women were like daughters, but to Olivia, it felt as if her mother-in-law's attention always leaned slightly more toward Eudora. Every smile, every kind word from Lucia, was like a prize that Olivia desperately sought to claim for herself. Eudora, though, felt differently. She felt overlooked. It wasn't that Lucia was unkind to her. It was just that there was an unspoken competition, one that she couldn't quite shake. Each glance from Lucia seemed to confirm Olivia's position in her life, leaving Eudora with a bitter sense of being the second choice. It gnawed at her, this idea that she would always come second in Lucia's eyes. Despite her best efforts to bond with her, to be seen and loved in the same way, it never seemed to happen. The women, living together in a shared house, exchanged pleasantries that felt increasingly hollow. Each interaction, even the smallest, held an underlying edge of competition. It was the smallest things, like who Lucia would sit with at dinner, who Lucia would call when something was wrong. Eudora didn't want to feel this way, but the jealousy was there, constantly simmering just beneath the surface. It wasn't that Olivia was bad. She was kind, thoughtful, and generous. But she seemed to get everything that Eudora wanted, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. The rivalry between the two women, though subtle, had begun to take its toll. It wasn't just a matter of seeking approval, it was the underlying feeling that something was being taken away from Eudora. Her attempts to forge a deeper bond with Lucia had always fallen short, and each failed attempt left her feeling more isolated. Olivia, in her mind, had the perfect connection with Lucia, a connection that Eudora could never quite replicate. It wasn't that Lucia had intentionally pushed her away, it was just that Olivia seemed to know how to earn that affection, while Eudora always felt like she was chasing after something just out of reach. In moments of quiet, when the house was still and everyone else was busy, Eudora would sit with her thoughts, wondering if she was being too sensitive. Was it really all in her head, or was there something to the way Lucia favored Olivia? It was a constant battle, one that she could never fully resolve. The constant comparison, the quiet observations, they all built up over time, each one stacking on top of the last until it felt impossible to ignore. Eudora's mind raced with the need to change the narrative, to shift Lucia's attention back to her, to feel like she was seen, truly seen, by the woman who should have been her closest ally. Yet, there were moments when she felt that perhaps Olivia wasn't even aware of the tension. Maybe Olivia didn't even notice how she effortlessly captured Lucia's admiration. In those moments, Eudora would try to imagine a life where she and Olivia weren't rivals, where they were simply sisters-in-law, free from this unspoken battle. But that fantasy quickly crumbled as she watched Olivia move through the house with a quiet confidence, a sense of belonging that Eudora could never quite grasp. The jealousy bubbled up, sharp and fierce, and she couldn't help but feel like she was losing a war she never agreed to fight. As time passed, the tension between Olivia and Eudora became harder to ignore. There were no loud arguments or explosive confrontations, but there was something in the air, a heaviness that lingered in every room they shared. Even the small gestures, like Lucia's laughter or her casual comments about how much she admired Olivia's cooking, stung deeply for Eudora. She tried to push those feelings down, convincing herself that it didn't matter, that Lucia's love was enough to go around. But the more she tried to convince herself, the more the resentment grew. It was a silent battle, fought in the shadows of her mind, and it was wearing her thin. Eudora began to feel like she was trapped in a never-ending loop of trying to prove herself to be worthy of the attention that Olivia seemed to effortlessly command. She watched as Olivia made Lucia laugh, shared tender moments, and received endless praise for her kindness. Every little act of love from Lucia felt like a defeat for Eudora, a reminder that no matter what she did, she could never measure up. The more she tried to break free from these feelings, the more they consumed her, until her every action was driven by the desperate need to be seen and valued in a way that Olivia already was. In those rare moments when Eudora caught herself, when she paused and looked at the bigger picture, she wondered if there was a way out. Could there ever be peace between them? Could she let go of the jealousy, the resentment, and simply share the love that Lucia had for both of them? But that question never stayed in her mind for long, because the reality of her emotions was too powerful to ignore. She had become fixated on winning, on proving that she deserved Lucia's love just as much as Olivia did. And so, the rivalry continued, each day building toward something she couldn't yet foresee, but feared nonetheless. The simmering tension between Eudora and Olivia reached its boiling point one fateful evening. The air was thick with unspoken words as Lucia prepared for the family gathering. The house was alive with the hustle and bustle of the evening's preparations, but for Olivia, it felt like the calm before a storm. She had watched Eudora grow closer to Lucia in recent weeks, and the feeling of being overshadowed was too much to bear. She could feel her jealousy rising again, twisting like a knot in her stomach. Olivia, ever the strategist, knew that if she didn't act now, her place in Lucia's heart would be lost forever. In the kitchen, Olivia quietly prepared a drink, a simple glass of juice, the kind Lucia always enjoyed before an event. But today, there was something different in the air. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for the bottle of poison she had hidden in a small, unused cabinet. The plan was simple. Slip the poison into the drink intended for Eudora. Lucia would never know the difference. After all, it was just a harmless drink. Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as she imagined the outcome. Eudora, out of the picture, and Olivia standing front and center in Lucia's affections. But as the evening unfolded, the unexpected happened. Lucia, unaware of the plot brewing behind the scenes, picked up Eudora's glass by mistake. Olivia watched in horror as her mother-in-law took a sip, her lips curving into a smile as she praised the drink's sweetness. For a moment, Olivia froze. The knot in her stomach twisted into something much darker. She had miscalculated, but it was too late now. Lucia had unknowingly drunk from the poisoned glass, and there was no going back. The consequences of her actions would unfold in a way she never could have anticipated. As the minutes ticked by, the weight of Olivia's actions began to settle in. The poison, carefully hidden in the drink, took effect quickly. At first, Lucia seemed fine, smiling and chatting with the family as they gathered around the table. But soon, things began to change. Lucia's smile faltered, and her movements slowed. She began to feel a strange heaviness in her chest, a sharp pain that she couldn't shake. The room around her started to blur. The joyful chatter of the family became muffled, as if she were sinking into a fog. Olivia watched in silence, her heart pounding in her chest. A sick thrill surged through her veins, but it was quickly replaced by fear. What had she done? The very thing she had planned to orchestrate in her mind now seemed like a nightmare. She had only meant to remove the competition, but now the outcome was beyond her control. Lucia collapsed in a chair, her face pale and contorted in pain. The room erupted into chaos, with family members rushing to her side, not knowing what had happened, but sensing something was terribly wrong. In the midst of the panic, Olivia stepped back, her mind racing with the consequences of her actions. Her once steady hand now trembled, her thoughts consumed with guilt. She had gone too far. What was meant to be a strategic move in the game for Lucia's love had turned into something monstrous. The reality of what she had done, what she had caused, was too overwhelming to comprehend. As Lucia's condition worsened, Olivia could only watch as the woman she had tried so hard to impress slipped further and further away from her, all because of a moment of twisted desperation. Within hours, Lucia's condition deteriorated, and the once vibrant woman was now a shadow of herself. The family, frantic and confused, couldn't understand what had happened. Doctors were called, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. Lucia was gone, her life extinguished in a cruel twist of fate. Eudora, who had been unaware of the poison lurking in her glass, was left in stunned disbelief. She couldn't comprehend the tragedy that had unfolded in front of her. How could this have happened? How could her mother-in-law, the woman who had always been a second mother to her, be taken away in such a way? As the authorities arrived to investigate, Olivia stood at the center of it all, a mask of grief plastered on her face. She wept alongside the family, her cries heartfelt, yet her eyes were cold, calculating. She had played her part to perfection, masking her true emotions, while the world around her spun in confusion. The shock of Lucia's sudden death consumed everyone else, but in Olivia's mind, it was the culmination of a plan years in the making. What had once been a quiet battle for affection had now turned into a deadly game, one where Olivia felt that Finally, she had won. But as Eudora stood in the corner of the room, her mind swirling with confusion and grief, she knew something was wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind this. The thought of Olivia crossed her mind, but she quickly pushed it aside. No, it couldn't be. She had no proof, no way of knowing. Yet, deep down, a fire began to ignite in her heart. She didn't know how or why, but Eudora swore that she would find out the truth. In the back of her mind, revenge started to take root, and with it, a burning desire for justice that would not be easily extinguished. The days following Lucia's death were a blur of sorrow and confusion for everyone, but for Eudora, they were something far worse. The grief she felt was profound, but it was intertwined with an overwhelming sense of disbelief. The sudden, tragic loss of Lucia seemed impossible to process, especially with the strange circumstances surrounding it. The family believed that it was an accident, a sudden illness perhaps, or something in the food or drink that went unnoticed. But as the days passed, the whispers began, and soon the police were involved. Eudora found herself at the center of an investigation she never saw coming. It was a chilling moment when the police arrived at the door, and the weight of their questions began to fall on Eudora. Her mind raced, her heart pounded in her chest. How could they possibly think she was involved? She had no idea what had happened to Lucia. Yet the evidence, the poison in the drink, the circumstances, seemed to point directly to her. It was as though the universe had conspired against her. She had no explanation for how the poison got into the drink, but it didn't matter. In the eyes of the law, she was guilty until proven innocent, and that truth hung heavily over her like a dark cloud. Olivia, ever the actress, played her part perfectly. She wept alongside Eudora, pretending to be just as distraught as the rest of the family. Yet, there was a coldness in her eyes, a detached composure that didn't quite match her outward grief. She offered condolences, but there was a look in her eyes that Eudora couldn't shake, the look of someone who knew more than they were letting on. But Eudora, still in shock, couldn't bring herself to fully comprehend what was happening. All she knew was that her life was falling apart. With each passing hour, she felt her world crumble, and the bitter sting of betrayal began to rise within her. The days in the police station were a blur of cold, harsh questioning. Eudora found herself trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't escape from. Every word she spoke seemed to dig her deeper into a hole she didn't belong in. The evidence, small as it was, stacked against her. The police had found traces of the poison in her drink. They found that the glass she had intended to drink from had been tampered with. There was no way to explain it away. It didn't matter that she had no idea the drink had been poisoned. No one cared about the truth, only what seemed to fit the story. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't answer. Why would anyone want to frame her? Who could possibly benefit from her downfall? Olivia's face lingered in her thoughts, but she pushed the idea aside. It couldn't be her, could it? Still, something gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, a whisper that Eudora couldn't quite shake. As the days passed, Eudora found herself in a cell, the cold, hard reality of her situation sinking in. The walls felt like they were closing in, and she knew that her life as she knew it had changed forever. The world outside continued, unaware of the storm brewing within the prison walls. In the cold, sterile silence of the cell, Eudora had little to occupy her mind other than the questions that had been running through her head since the moment she was arrested. Why had Olivia seemed so unfazed, so composed in the midst of her sorrow? Why had she been so quick to play the part of the grieving daughter-in-law when Eudora could sense something far darker behind her eyes? It didn't make sense. As the days stretched into weeks, one thing became painfully clear to Eudora. She couldn't trust anyone, and no one, not even Lucia's death, could stand in the way of her pursuit of justice. The real killer was out there, and she swore she would find them. As the trial date approached, Eudora's emotions oscillated between disbelief and anger. She couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. How had she gone from a beloved daughter-in-law to a murder suspect in the blink of an eye? The prosecutor painted her as the obvious culprit, and with the mounting evidence against her, it seemed inevitable that she would be convicted. Yet, deep down, she knew the truth. She had never poisoned Lucia. She had loved her, cared for her like a second mother. But the more Eudora tried to explain this to her defense attorney, the more she realized that the justice system wasn't concerned with the truth. It was about appearances, and the truth wasn't as important as the illusion of guilt. Olivia, on the other hand, remained untouched by the storm of suspicion swirling around Eudora. She continued to play the part of the grieving, innocent woman, the family pillar holding everything together. As Eudora sat in her cold, dark cell, she couldn't help but notice how Olivia's life seemed to move forward. The visits, the sympathy, the support, everything that Eudora no longer had. It was maddening, the contrast between their situations. How could she stand idly by while Olivia took everything from her, her family, her freedom, and her future? And yet, in the solitude of her prison cell, Eudora's resolve began to strengthen. She may have been trapped physically, but her mind was still free, still sharp. She knew that the key to her freedom was out there, somewhere. The moment the truth about Lucia's death came to light, she would be free. Until then, Eudora would wait. She would endure the humiliation, the pain, and the uncertainty. Because deep in her heart, she knew this. She had been wronged, and she would stop at nothing to make sure that Olivia paid for what she had done. Months passed, and each day in prison seemed to blur together for Eudora. Her once vibrant world felt like a distant memory, and her thoughts were consumed with bitterness. Yet, amid the despair, a spark of determination began to grow inside her. Eudora knew that if she was ever going to find the truth and expose Olivia, she needed to escape. The prison walls, once a symbol of her confinement, had started to feel like nothing more than obstacles to be overcome. She was a woman on a mission, and nothing, not even the rigid system, could keep her from achieving it. Eudora's cell became her battleground. Every night, while the others slept, she would lie awake, strategizing. Her mind raced with plans, scenarios, and potential escape routes. The walls of her cell felt suffocating, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had always been resourceful, always thinking on her feet. The prison might have taken her body, but it couldn't imprison her will. Eudora started observing the guards, the routines, the small vulnerabilities in the system. Every tiny detail, every crack in the surface became a potential way out. The key to her escape came in the form of Clara, a fellow inmate who had been serving a sentence for a lesser crime. Clara was known for her connections, her ability to talk her way out of almost anything. The two women formed an unlikely alliance, their bond solidifying over shared stories of injustice and betrayal. Clara, seeing the fire in Eudora's eyes, agreed to help her. Through whispered conversations and carefully planned exchanges, they set the wheels of Eudora's escape into motion. It wasn't going to be easy, but with Clara's help, Eudora finally saw a way out. The night of Eudora's escape arrived, and the atmosphere in the prison was thick with tension. Every shadow seemed darker than the last, every creak of the building a signal of her impending freedom. Clara had managed to smuggle in a key that would unlock the doors of the prison's outer gates. Eudora's heart raced as she prepared herself, but there was no turning back now. The decision had been made, and the only thing left to do was to act. She had spent too many months in despair, too many sleepless nights plotting this moment, to let it slip away now. As the evening settled in, Eudora slipped from her cell, cloaked in the darkness that shrouded the prison. Her pulse quickened with every step, every inch that took her further from the life she had known, and closer to the one she dreamed of, one where she could take revenge, where she could expose Olivia for the monster she truly was. The halls were eerily quiet, but the sounds of the guards' movements echoed in the distance. Eudora knew she had little time, and the pressure was mounting with each passing second. Her every movement was calculated, deliberate, as she followed Clara's instructions to the letter. The final hurdle came at the gates, the cold steel that had kept her imprisoned for so long. Eudora reached out, her hand trembling as she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click, and for a moment, she could hardly believe it. The door swung open, and the outside world, the world she had once known, was just beyond her reach. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and the moonlight bathed everything in an eerie glow. Eudora stepped out, a fugitive now, but also free. The prison that had held her for so long was now behind her, and there was no turning back. Her focus was razor sharp, and the path ahead was clear. She would find Olivia, confront her, and make her pay for what she had done. With the weight of freedom pressing down on her shoulders, Eudora's heart pounded in her chest. She could still feel the cold concrete of the prison beneath her feet, but it was quickly fading into the distance. The moonlit night felt strangely comforting as she moved through the shadows, her footsteps light but purposeful. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy, and she would have to rely on all her instincts to stay hidden. But for the first time in months, Eudora felt a sense of control, a feeling she had long since lost behind the prison bars. Her mind was consumed with one thing, Olivia. The thought of her brought a coldness to Eudora's bones, but also a burning desire for justice. The anger, the betrayal, and the guilt for what had been stolen from her, her freedom, her peace, and her dignity, fueled her every step. Eudora didn't care how long it took or how far she had to go. She would hunt down Olivia, confront her, and expose the truth. She had spent too much time locked away, and now it was time to make everything right again. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She wouldn't stop until Olivia paid for what she had done. As Eudora made her way into the night, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led to this moment. The months of being trapped in a system that had wronged her, the isolation, the pain, all of it had built up to this one pivotal moment. She had survived it all, and now she would ensure that justice would be served, not by the law, but by her own hands. The path was set, and there was no turning back now. Eudora's heart raced as she approached the house that had once been her home, the place where everything had begun, the house that had witnessed both love and betrayal. It had been weeks since she'd escaped from prison, but it felt like a lifetime. The streets outside were quiet, and the night air was still. The weight of what she was about to do pressed heavily on her chest. She had been planning this moment for months, but now, standing at the threshold of the place where her world had shattered, she hesitated. Olivia was in there, the woman who had taken everything from her, the woman who had framed her for a crime she didn't commit. The tension in the air was palpable, and the final confrontation loomed ahead. Every step Eudora took toward the house felt like it echoed in her chest, like the world was holding its breath. The house, once warm and filled with the laughter of family, now seemed cold and foreboding. The memories of days gone by, days when she had felt loved, when she had been a part of something real, came rushing back, only to be quickly replaced by the searing anger that had kept her going. Eudora knew that she had come here for a reason. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her life. She had lost everything, and now, with the truth burning inside her, she was ready to take it all back. As Eudora stood at the door, she could hear the faint sounds of movement inside. Olivia was there, somewhere. Likely unaware that her time was running out, Eudora's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob, the anticipation building in her chest. She had no more time to waste. This moment, this confrontation, had been years in the making. With one final breath, she turned the handle and stepped into the house, ready to face Olivia, ready to expose the truth, and ready to finally put an end to the torment that had consumed her. The house was dimly lit, the shadows casting long, eerie lines across the walls. Eudora moved through the space like a predator, every footstep measured and silent. The scent of the familiar, the old furniture, the scent of cooking that had once filled the air during family dinners, was now suffocating, heavy with the tension of the confrontation that was about to unfold. As Eudora moved deeper into the house, her thoughts kept returning to Olivia, the woman she had once considered family, the woman who had stolen everything from her, stood just beyond the door to the living room. Eudora's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening as she moved closer to the final moment. The living room door creaked as she pushed it open. Olivia was sitting on the couch, her back to the door, her attention diverted. She hadn't heard Eudora's entrance. For a moment, Eudora simply stood there, watching her. Olivia looked so much like the woman she had been before, calm, composed, the image of the perfect daughter-in-law. But that mask of civility hid the darkness inside, the dark secrets that Eudora had come to uncover. The woman who had smiled in her face, who had pretended to be her friend, was the one responsible for the death of Lucia and the ruination of her life. Eudora felt the fury rise within her chest, but she held her ground. This was the moment where the truth would finally be revealed. Eudora stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with rage. "Olivia," she said, her voice low but cutting through the silence of the room. The woman on the couch froze, the blood draining from her face as she turned slowly, eyes widening in shock. Olivia's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing the fear that Eudora had known would be there. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and the two women locked eyes, one filled with guilt, the other with vengeance. Eudora didn't need to say another word. The truth hung in the air between them. undeniable. The time for lies was over. Olivia's face twisted with panic, her hands trembling as she tried to compose herself. The illusion of innocence she had worked so hard to maintain was quickly unraveling, and she knew, deep down, that there was no escaping the reckoning that was now before her. "Eudora, please," she stammered, her voice shaky, as if pleading for mercy. "You don't understand. It was never supposed to be like this." But Eudora could see through the desperation in her eyes. Olivia wasn't sorry. She was afraid of being exposed, afraid of the consequences of her actions. Eudora stepped closer, her voice now calm but laced with fury. "You think you can get away with it? You think you can destroy my life and walk away without facing the consequences?" The words spilled from her lips like a torrent, each syllable heavy with the pain she had carried for months. She had suffered in silence, her name tarnished, her freedom taken away, while Olivia continued to live in the shadows, untouched by the devastation she had caused. But now, Eudora had her in her grasp. Now, the truth would be heard. Olivia's tears flowed freely now, but it was too late. Eudora didn't care for her tears or her excuses. What mattered was justice. What mattered was finally taking back what had been stolen from her. "Lucia was like a mother to me," Eudora whispered, her voice breaking slightly as the memory of her mother-in-law flooded back. "And you killed her. You poisoned her. And for what? So you could have what? Her love? Her approval?" The silence in the room was deafening as Olivia crumbled before her, no longer the confident, calculating woman she had been. Eudora's voice softened. "You won't get away with it. Not this time." As the final confrontation unfolded, Eudora felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had done what needed to be done. The truth had been exposed, and Olivia's reign of manipulation and lies had ended. The darkness that had haunted Eudora for so long was finally lifted, and though there was no law to give her back what she had lost, there was a sense of closure, a justice she could call her own. Olivia would face the consequences of her actions, and Eudora would walk away from this, free at last.